You're listening to GOAZCATS.com today, a podcast all about your Arizona Wildcats. Featuring the latest news and analysis from the staff at GOAZCATS.com. Now, straight from the old Pueblo, Tucson, Arizona, here's the host of GOAZCATS.com today.
Welcome to another edition of GOAZCATS.com today. I'm Troy Hutchison, joined alongside, as always, Matt Moreno. And Matt, today Jedd Fisch held his press conference after Arizona falls to Colorado 34-0, loses Gunner Cruz for the season, as he announced during the press conference, to some kind of tear in his throwing hand in the thumb area. Just not good news for Arizona.
Another week, another quarterback down for the season. I mean, it's just a brutal stretch for Arizona. As we mentioned last time, just the worst thing that could possibly happen to Arizona, a team that's struggling and trying to find a way to win games, to have yet another starting quarterback go down. I think a lot of Will Plummer, but this is going to be a difficult task. I mean, he got dinged up himself in the NAU game in his one start this year, so he hasn't been supremely healthy. After that, you don't have very many options. You have Luke Ashworth is apparently going to be the second guy in the depth chart. There was no depth chart released as of today. That'll be coming out shortly, we believe. But Luke Ashworth should be the number 2 guy on that list. And then after that, who knows? I mean, Raiden Zermino, a freshman, a walk-on freshman, is going to be the 3rd guy who's available and who's part of that quarterback room. But there's always going to be that talk about, hey, you have a receiver out there who's thrown some passes, who's played quarterback before. You try to make that move with Jamari Joyner. But at this point, the focus is going to be on Will Plummer. It's going to be his show, I think, until further notice. But he hasn't exactly, set the world on fire with what he's done this season. Didn't have a particularly good showing against Colorado when he came in to play against, or when he came in that game to relieve Gunner Cruz. I don't know, just a lot more issues for Arizona and for Jedd Fisch trying to get his very first win here at Arizona still.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the quarterback situation. Arizona also had injuries throughout its roster. Keon Bars will be a game-time decision. Josh McCauley will be a game-time decision. Drake Anderson is listed kind of as doubtful, is what I gathered from that. And a couple guys also that I can't remember right now. And then Treshawn Hayward is not going to participate due to personal reasons. And again, J.B. Brown is still out due to personal reasons. So it seems like Arizona's dropping like flies right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was like you couldn't even remember all the names that Jedd Fisch listed off because he went through basically everyone that's not going to be available or might not be available this Friday night against Washington. I counted 4 starters. I mean, if you're going to count Drake Anderson as a starter, which I think you do, at least a co-starter at this point, that's 4 starters with Josh McCauley, Drake Anderson, Josh Donovan, and
Keon
Bars. Yeah. All guys who play roles.
And
all
I
guys
forgot
who
Donovan.
All guys who do things in our starters, for the most part. And so, again, you're already struggling. We've already mentioned the depth at offensive line pretty much since the beginning of the season. There really isn't very much depth up front. Now you have 2 of your starters potentially not playing Friday night. Just a difficult spot for Arizona to be in. I don't know what it means for this offense. I mean, there's going to be some other bodies that step in and other guys that probably practice in those starting jobs throughout the course of the week. But, man, Arizona coming off a game where it got shut out, and now you're losing a bunch of pieces that could help you score points. If
you could imagine the worst possible outcome to last week, this was it. I don't think anybody could have imagined Arizona losing the starter and 4 or 5 other starters, not just at the quarterback position. Josh Baker will probably be that guy to fill in if Josh Donovan isn't able to go. But let's look at the game. Like you mentioned, Will Plummer came in, and the offense was still ineffective.
Yeah, I mean, just with either quarterback, they just could not move the ball really. The issue was, I mean, early on they had opportunities to score. I think that's, so far, if we're going to pick one theme, I know it's difficult to pick one theme about this season so far, why things have gone wrong for Arizona. To me, it's just, everything can come back to missed opportunities. Arizona had an opportunity, I believe it was 1st and goal from the 1.
Pretty easy opportunity for most teams.
And could not get the ball in the end zone. I mean, I don't know that there's any excuse for that. I mean, you have a big quarterback who you assume can, line up and get you 1 yard. You have several running backs that I think can get you 1 yard. It was just, it was really difficult to watch, and you have to kind of somewhat question the decisions there. You line up in shotgun in one of those instances, and you just can't get the ball in the end zone. You figure a team, why are you going to go back, 5 or 6 yards or 7 yards, whatever it is, to try and pick up one? It seems like it's not. Maybe other teams can do that, and maybe if that's what's kind of built into your offense, you can do that. A team with maybe a better running quarterback can do that, but you have a 6'5" quarterback who has some good weight to him, who has good size. Just have him run into the pile and pick up a yard, or give it to your fullback or any other option. You have so many different. You have so many different options you can do in that situation, and to me that was kind of a microcosm of the season where you have the opportunity. It feels like it's there for you to take. Colorado at that point wasn't really doing much. I mean, they were struggling. They decided to kick field goals instead of going for touchdowns, which I thought was a wrong decision by them, because you have a team like Arizona, just score touchdowns. I mean, you have an opportunity. I think you're going to have more than one opportunity to score points, and if you don't get it, you don't get it. But I think you have to be aggressive there, and so they left the door open for Arizona, and Arizona just couldn't come through. And so it started there, and then I just think it kind of snowballed from there. And towards the end of the game, obviously you have the block punt, which was a big deal. Have Arizona with 2 block punts returned for touchdowns this year, just unheard of. You just never hear of that. And then you have the interception return for a touchdown. Just bad news all around for Arizona. The defense continued to make some strides, but it's just not enough. And if the offense is going to give them nothing, they have to essentially play perfect, and they didn't do that. And they even did some of the things they wanted to do, slowing down the run from Colorado. Jarek Broussard only had a little over 50 yards in that game rushing. You did pretty much what you wanted to do. The explosive plays, I think, if you're talking defensively, that was, to me, the big issue, which continues to be the big issue for this team.
3 explosive plays, totaling, I believe, 129 yards in passing, and Lewis only threw for 260. So you're talking about more than half of the yardage in 3 plays. And again, like you said, that continues to be an issue. Now, is that blitzing issue, or is that a safeties issue?
Well, a couple of them came on the corners. I mean, Isaiah Rutherford had one. Christian Roland-Wallace had one. It's tough to say, because the one on Christian Roland-Wallace, I don't think there was anything more he could have done. He played perfect coverage. It was a perfectly thrown pass, a perfectly executed catch by Brendan Rice, I believe is who caught that one, and not much more you can do in that situation. I thought he played it right. I thought Isaiah Rutherford kind of had his issues in that game, which is disappointing, because I picked him as someone that I thought was going to have a big game. I thought like this was, I felt like this was one of those games where he could show up, against that group, but Brendan Rice has a career day. I mean, it feels like that's been a theme throughout this losing streak. You can go back to several different players and go, they had their best day against Arizona, and that's been another theme for this, through this losing streak over the last 18 games now, where it feels like there's been repeated players that just, you look down and it says career high, career high, career high, and it's just Brendan Rice had that, this last game, and really made Arizona pay with those explosive plays. But to me, if there's one thing you can really point out and say this has to improve, otherwise Arizona isn't going to win games on the defensive side, it's those explosive plays, because those have killed Arizona this entire season.
Yeah, explosive plays, and then I also think a combination of the offense not being able to stay on the field. Your defense is just on the field way too much right now for Arizona. It's a multitude of issues for Arizona right now, offensively, defensively. But, let's talk about the opportunities that we touched on a little bit. Jedd Fisch in his press conference mentioned that he feels like his team moves the ball fairly well from 25-yard line to about the other team's 30, 25-ish yard line, and that's where they seem to stall out. Now, you mentioned that, that's veteran quarterback play. When you had Jordan McLeod back there, they were converting more opportunities. When you have youngsters back there, sometimes that doesn't happen. But he also brought up the point during the post game of, I need to coach better, this coaching staff needs to coach better. So is it an equal blame, or?
I think so. I mean, I think it's a multitude of things. I had a tweet that kind of got a lot of traction and kind of pointed to that I think we're reaching that point where, for Arizona, where you can't just continue to say everything is the fault of Kevin Sumlin and the previous coaching staff. They left Arizona with nothing, with zero talent. This new staff brought in a good, brought in a good amount of talent, with what they had to work with. Yes, they didn't have, the massive amount of room that you would want for a new coaching staff, but they filled it in pretty well. They got a lot of transfers, got a lot of new pieces that are playing. So it's not like, this entire team was built by someone else. For the most part, it was. And I'm not saying that Kevin Sumlin should be without blame. I think they definitely did this program a huge disservice. The recruiting was not up to par. I think they installed kind of a mindset that has been difficult to kind of work this team out of. But 6 games in, midway through this first season, I think the thing that I'm looking for from Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff is some sign of progress. Right now, it feels like this team is going backward. I understand. You have 2 starting quarterbacks go down. That's huge. That's going to be difficult for any team to overcome.
Yeah.
You could have the best team in the country, and your 2 top quarterbacks or 2 of your starting quarterbacks during the season go down. That's going to be difficult for anybody to overcome. Yeah. I understand that, but there's been some things where you just, and going back to the point that you've been making kind of the whole season, play calling wise, the jet sweeps, the things that are this, it seems like they're trying to be creative, but almost outthinking themselves at times. You have a guy like Jalen John, who I'm sure we're going to talk about at some point in this podcast, who, we continue to say it, only does positive things. He's lost 3 yards all season. I looked it up today. He's only lost 3 yards all season long.
Wow.
Which means every time he touches the ball, something positive is happening. I believe he's had 18 carries this season for 114 yards, overall 111 yards maybe, if you take out those 3 lost yards. But he's averaging somewhere around over 6 yards a carry.
Yeah.
Give that guy the ball. Go with what you know. Go with what you're looking at, with what you see is working. And to me, they've kind of gotten away from that at times.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jalen John, 18 carries, 100 and something yards rushing this season. He had 11 carries against Colorado for 71 yards. No touchdowns. Put them on that 1 yard line to be in prime position, and then you think yourself. I mean, it's going back to coaching, game planning. And, I mentioned the jet sweeps. That's one play that I absolutely hate. It seems like Arizona, whenever they get momentum, they run those jet sweeps, and it causes issues for the offense. But at what point does a coach say, okay, I need to stop out-coaching myself? Because obviously they know what they're doing, but maybe they're just trying to get too cute in the process.
And I think that's a byproduct of not having the talent. So I think it does go hand in hand with everything. And I think there was an assumption that I was like, Jedd Fisch needs to be fired. Like, that's not what I was saying in that tweet. That's not what I think if you're a fan and even if you're angry, I don't think that's what you want. I think maybe you think that's what you want at this point just because you haven't seen wins, but I think he definitely needs time. I think for every coach, you need to see what they're going to do with an entire roster of their own players. But I think the issues right now are a combination of not really knowing how to figure out how to use the players they have, and also I think the other part of it too is they're trying to install some complex things here at Arizona without their guys.
Yeah.
I understand the process of the players who are young need to know what they're doing, because in 2 and 3 years, us as Arizona, the coaches in their mind saying, we want to run certain things that they're going to need to know how to do. They need to learn that now. I understand that. But you also have to figure out how can you get wins. And installing things that are going to take years to learn is not the best way so far to kind of get wins, because, and I understand you have to kind of lay the groundwork and do all that, but at a certain point, I think things need to be a little bit more simplified.
Yeah.
You're talking about Will Plummer, who, again, the conversation it sounded like today needs to get caught up. I think Jedd Fisch talked about it, said he needs to pick things up in a hurry.
Yeah.
He's been here since last year. I mean, he's been with Jedd Fisch since Jedd Fisch stepped on campus. He went through spring ball. He went through training camp. Why does he still not, know everything that he should know? Is it too complex? I mean, there has to be a middle ground, I think, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how they approach that, because if you're still trying to install things and get them to learn the system, I think it becomes difficult. Defensively too, I think it feels like they've been able to progress a little bit more than the offensive side. Haven't had as many injury issues, have kind of had their entire group for most of the year. I've had 1 or 2 guys, go out of the lineup here and there.
Yeah.
But I think that plays into it as well. But at a certain point, you have to figure out, okay, as we've been talking about, what works? Let's do that. And I think Arizona's kind of at that point where if you're going to get a win, you need to figure out, just go with what works.
Yeah, go with what works. And, Jedd Fisch, in his last press conference before the Colorado game, mentioned for Gunner Cruz, he's best in a 2-minute offense when it's high tempo. Everything's just clicking, going. You're not making read decisions. You're just making quick timing decisions. Will Plummer seems similar in that regard. Would you agree, or?
It's different, I think. I think the decision making, I think he's thinking about too much, is the sense that I get. I don't know. I've watched him in practice, watched him during the games. It feels, again, going back to my point I just made, it feels like both of them are just trying to process a lot of information. And again, you forget this is the first time that Gunner Cruz is starting a game, this season. Obviously started BYU, those other games, but he hasn't ever really played, in a game before. He played against USC last year. That was his first action as a college player. Will Plummer was thrown into a game last year against UCLA, eventually started a game But he has a very small sample size. He's still very young in terms of, learning this offense, but learning the college game as well. And so all those things take time. And to me, it feels like they look, and Jedd Fisch mentioned it last week with Gunner Cruz, where he looks up and he's looking at so much that he just gets lost. It just looks kind of like a jumbled mess. And I think that's a similar case for Will Plummer. The interesting thing with Will Plummer is I thought, and there was, because they both ended up as co-starters, essentially, a case could be made for him being the original starter for this team on his own. Yeah. I think you've seen what the issues are going to be. He's going to turn the ball over. I've said this time and time again. He's going to turn the ball over, but I think when plays do break down, even with Jordan McLeod in there, if you have him in this conversation, when plays do break down, I don't know that there's any quarterback on this roster who can do more with that situation than Will Plummer. I think he's at his best when things break down and he can freelance a little bit. He's in a system where that's difficult to do because it's pretty rigid. There's things built in for places for you to go with the ball, but the plan is pretty much out there. There's not a lot of room for freelancing and making things up, drawing stuff in the dirt and going and making plays happen. So that's where I think things are getting lost a little bit. I think he has this kind of gunslinger mentality, this mentality of I'm just going to go make things happen, but within the system that doesn't quite work as well. So finding that middle ground I think is going to be important for him. But to me, when I see him and see what he's looking at, it feels both guys kind of feel like they're a little bit slow in terms of just, I think they see what they should have done after it happens. Yeah. The window closes up, or the play that they saw was open isn't there when they see it. So I think they just have to be quicker about their decision making. I think that definitely is the case for Gunner Cruz. I think it is still somewhat the case for Will Plummer. I think he is a little bit better at that, but I think it's going to be repetitions for him. And so maybe I think I have a lot of confidence that, assuming he starts all 6 games, or plays the majority of all 6 games, I think he'll look much better against ASU than he will against Washington. I think it's just the repetitions, knowing he's going to be the guy, getting all the practice reps, getting most of the practice reps. I think that's going to help him understand what he needs to be looking for and give him an idea of kind of what he needs to be seeing. It's one thing when you're the backup or you're the third string guy and you're looking at that and you're watching from the sidelines versus being in there. He's only had 1 week where he's been gone into week knowing, hey, I'm going to be the starter this weekend. And so I think he's going to improve, but could be a rocky road until that time.
Yeah, and unfortunately for him, it is a short week for Arizona. You're not playing on Saturday. You're playing Friday night against Washington, a team that you're familiar with, but you don't have that extra day to prepare for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it just feels like all the cards are stacked against Arizona. Whatever could go wrong this season feels like it has. In this week, I think you're ideally, kind of like previously when you went through a quarterback change, ideally you'd have a bye week and you go, okay, and you can kind of catch your breath, get some guys healthy, let Will Plummer have a couple weeks to get ready for Washington. Instead, you have a short week. The thing that stands out to me, listening to Jedd Fisch talk, is that he doesn't feel defeated, which I think is positive. I think he seems very realistic. I think he understands, and he said, I've never been in a position like this where you have 2 of your starting quarterbacks go down. Yeah. This is unprecedented territory for this team, for Jedd Fisch. But I think he needs to continue to kind of be realistic, but also I think it's just in him, it's naturally within him to be positive. There wasn't a lot of negativity coming out of the press conference to start this week, and so as long as they don't give up, that's all Jedd Fisch can ask for from those players, and I think it's been very clear from listening to the players, at least through the first half of the season, the positivity from their head coach has helped. Yeah. I think if they understand that he's bought in, which is something they mentioned even back in camp, they feel like Jedd Fisch is bought in and invested in this program, everything will be fine, and they can work through these issues. Maybe the wins aren't going to come, but you're still at least building for the future. What he can't do is lose his team.
Yeah, and how different is that from last season? Because Arizona went 0-5 last season, and we saw the team kind of just seem like fall apart in games and not have that same fight. There seems to be that fight, even though they're out of the ball game, 34-0. They're driving down Colorado's side of the field, come up short on a 4th down, but they still were able to drive the ball.
You don't lose 70-7, to me, unless you've given up a little bit. Yeah. And I think that's the easiest way to go about it. And you say, what did they look like in that game? They looked defeated. They looked like they didn't want to be there. And I think that's a trickle-down effect from the top. And so I don't get that sense with this team. They've been saying all the right things. It'll be interesting to hear what they have to say, what the players and even the coordinators have to say this week. But I think it feels different than last year. Now it's about trying to make that transition and just make improvements. Because right now, as I said, as much as there is positivity, it feels like there's belief from the players and the team. they're going in the wrong direction right now. There are other elements that you can point to that say this is why, but they need to get this thing moving forward.
So again, thank you for joining us for another edition of GoAZCats.com today, and we'll be back with more stuff this week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of GoAZCats.com today. GoAZCats.com is the totally unofficial U of A fan site and your source for University of Arizona team coverage and recruiting news.